What exactly crossed the political border between Wyoming and Colorado in the dead of winter to make local hunters realize their territory would never be the same? For decades, this imaginary line meant everything to the law, yet predators rarely crossed it and survived. That dynamic shifted fundamentally in North Park, Jackson County, where the sub-zero winter wind cuts through the sagebrush at 8,000 feet. It was not a grand, managed reintroduction spectacle with fanfare. It was quiet paws moving over deep snowpack under a generic, dark night sky. Biologists knew a lone disperser passing through is a temporary anomaly. But when single sets of massive tracks blurred into a definitive, multi-animal trail, the terrifying reality hit home. Multiple wolves moving together in midwinter doesn't mean a simple visit. It signifies a pack structure, a claim, and a permanent statement of return to this specific corner of the Rockies. The first irrefutable proof of their residency did not come from a visual sighting, but from the carnage they left behind. Local ranchers and houndsmen, people who spent generations learning every draw and ridge near the Medicine Bow National Forest, started finding the evidence. These were not the methodical, cached kills of a mountain lion hidden under mountain debris. These were chaotic, violent scenes. A full-grown cow elk carcass, perhaps 500 pounds, completely torn apart, its skeleton disarticulated. Heavy structural bones were crushed by jaw pressures exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, exposing the marrow. Deep crimson arterial spray covered pristine white snow, detailing a frantic, communal struggle rather than a swift, solitary strike. This was the signature of pack hunting, a relentless, highly coordinated strategy that local game had not faced in 8 decades. Hunters scouting postseason got a sick feeling in their stomachs, not from hearing a howl, but from looking down. A wolf track is impossible to mistake for a coyote or a large domestic dog once you truly see it, especially when it is measuring 5 inches long and pressed deep into the mud or snow next to your own boot print. It is a physical stamp claiming ownership. When you identify fresh, heavy impressions leading directly toward a known herd of bedding elk you intended to hunt next fall, the entire landscape suddenly feels smaller and hostile. The historic silence of North Park, once peaceful, now felt like an absence of sound, a void waiting to be filled. Outfitter camps, usually bustling with talk of next season's trophy bulls, fell quiet as the realization set in. This crossing was not a temporary excursion. The specific geometry of the kill sites, scattered across critical winter range, and the purposeful travel patterns of the tracks confirmed this group was already established and efficient. State wildlife officials eventually had to acknowledge what the physical evidence on the ground had already proven. The frontier was closed, and gray wolves had successfully re-established a breeding foothold in Colorado, completely independent of human assistance. For local outfitters whose entire business models depend on quantifiable, predictable game densities, this was the starting gun for a multi-front war over resources. The delicate balance was shattered, replaced by a new, dynamic predator that was already altering the environment simply by existing within it. The snow continued to fall, burying the initial tracks and the frozen blood, but a profound, irreversible shift in game behavior was already underway. That profound alteration in survival strategies did not take years to manifest. For decades, the Rocky Mountain elk of Colorado followed predictable migrations, moving down from high summer alpine ranges to graze the wind-swept valley floors of places like the Yampa River Basin. These low-elevation flats offered accessible forage during the bitter winter months. But prey species possess a genetic memory, an ancestral alarm system that triggers the moment they realize they are being systematically targeted by a highly organized predator. The wide valleys, once a reliable winter sanctuary, instantly transformed into a sprawling kill zone. Elk herds numbering in the hundreds began to aggressively fragment and vanish, abandoning the exact drainages they had utilized since before human settlement. Instead of congregating in the exposed bottoms where wolves can effortlessly outrun and flank them, the elk retreated upward into hostile territory. They pushed back into the dark timber, navigating nearly impenetrable stands of lodgepole pine and spruce clinging to 40-degree slopes. This is an unforgiving environment for an ungulate weighing up to 700 pounds. The forage under the canopy is scarce, the terrain is treacherous, and the calories required just to stand in the freezing shade are immense. Yet, this harsh topography offers a crucial tactical advantage. Dense forest breaks a predator's line of sight, forcing the pack into a much slower pursuit, where their coordinated maneuvers shatter against a wall of tightly packed tree trunks and jagged deadfall. The elk deliberately traded the risk of winter starvation for a fighting chance. This rapid adaptation completely hollowed out the traditional map of the Colorado wilderness. Hunters holding premium tags for game management units in the northwestern counties arrived in November to find historic meadows completely barren. Veteran guides who had glassed the same sage-covered hillsides for 20 years stared through their spotting scopes at nothing but undisturbed snowfields. The elk were not decimated, but they had become ghosts, holding tight in the steep ravines and dense timber during all daylight hours, only moving in erratic patterns under the cover of darkness. The landscape of fear had been locally redrawn in these specific northwestern territories over the course of a few short seasons. A biological shockwave began rippling through the local ecosystem, altering grazing patterns and initiating a years-long process of changing vegetation growth along the riverbanks. Surviving in this high-stress reality meant the elk had to remain hyper-vigilant at all times, burning through precious winter fat reserves, simply navigating their rugged escape terrain. The gnawing stress of avoiding the valley floors forced the herds to inhabit the harshest microclimates on the mountain. But a predator biologically engineered to run down its meals does not simply starve when the prey hides in the thicket. When the ambient temperature drops to -10 degrees Fahrenheit and the elk are pinned down in the high elevation timber, the physical dynamics of the hunt are forced to evolve. The wolves recalibrate their approach, relying less on open ground speed and more on how their anatomy interacts with the frozen environment. That physical recalibration turns into a devastating weapon when the midwinter snowpack on the western slope piles 3 feet deep. A gray wolf carries a formidable 100-pound frame on enormous paws that spread out under pressure. They act like specialized snowshoes, allowing the predator to float on the icy crust. A mature bull elk weighs 7 times as much and balances entirely on sharp hooves that punch straight through the packed powder. Every single stride for the elk becomes a massive, agonizing deadlift. The wolves understand this physics equation perfectly. They do not need to sprint to secure a kill in these conditions. They only need to maintain a steady, relentless trot. When a newly formed pack locates a solitary bull pushed deep into a high-elevation ravine, the strategy is purely about kinetic energy. The wolves fan out, forcing the heavy animal to break the trail. As the elk plunges chest deep into the snowbanks, his heart rate spikes, his lungs burning the freezing air. The predators take turns running in the trench he just dug. They conserve their own energy while their prey spends everything he has left. They nip at his hocks, pulling back before his heavy antlers can swing in defense. It is not a quick ambush, but a calculated, agonizing drain of stamina. The elk lunges forward, sinking, stumbling, his body temperature rising dangerously under his thick winter coat, while the pack stays cool, rotating their frontline runners. After 2 miles of this punishing gauntlet, the biology of the prey begins to fail. Lactic acid floods the elk's massive leg muscles, paralyzing him from the inside out. He stops fighting the terrain and just stands there in the deep trench. His head drops low, steam pouring from his nostrils into the sub-zero air. His legs shake uncontrollably. The wolves do not rush in for a cinematic, leaping strike to the throat. They circle just out of range, patiently watching his oxygen debt peak. They wait until the bull is so utterly hollowed out by the sheer effort of moving through the snow that he can no longer lift his defenses. The exhaustion strips away his resistance long before the teeth actually sink in. This brutal calculus of energy and snow does not play out in a remote, inaccessible wilderness. It is happening in the exact draws and timber patches that local sportsmen have scouted for generations. The broken saplings and the blood-soaked snow left behind are silent testaments to a pack operating with terrifying efficiency. Hunters hiking into these valleys are finding the stripped carcasses, feeling the immediate weight of a new apex competitor. But humans are no longer relying solely on boot prints and bones to measure how close this violent reality is getting to their own routines. Technology left behind in the freezing woods is silently capturing the nightly movements of a predator that is already mapping out the human footprint. That digital surveillance used to be a routine chore for Colorado outdoorsmen, a quiet anticipation of seeing which trophy bulls had survived the winter. Pulling a memory card from a motion-activated camera strapped to a pine tree in the Root National Forest is now a tense exercise in threat assessment. A hunter slips the card into a reader while sitting in the freezing cab of his truck, expecting the familiar monochrome infrared image of a foraging mule deer or a stray black bear. Instead, the screen illuminates the glowing, bright white eyes of a 130-pound predator staring directly at the hidden lens. The timestamp reads 2:14 a.m. The wolf is not caught in a blurry, frightened sprint. It is walking deliberately down the exact hiking trail the hunter cleared with a machete just 2 weeks prior. These cameras are not placed randomly across millions of acres of public land. They are deliberately anchored to overlook the most strategic choke points, hidden water sources, and ancient game trails. By capturing wolves in these highly specific locations, the images confirm a chilling reality. The pack is actively utilizing the corridors cut by humans to navigate the dense timber efficiently. Sequential pictures, taken hours apart, show massive males pausing to sniff the synthetic fabric of pop-up ground blinds and aggressively marking the metal legs of hunting platforms. This is a profound psychological violation for someone who has scouted a specific drainage for 20 years. The remote sanctuary where a local guide once felt absolute ownership is suddenly being closely hunted by a highly coordinated pack. The woods no longer feel empty and waiting for the season to open. They feel occupied. The reaction within the local community is visceral and immediate. Highly coveted, decades-old hunting leases in the thick brush of the White River Basin are being quietly abandoned by men who refuse to compete with a dominant pack. Fathers who used to send their teenagers out alone to glass the rocky ridges at dusk are suddenly enforcing a strict buddy system. They are insisting on heavy-caliber sidearms just to hike in and check a trail camera a single mile from the paved highway. It is a sudden, uncomfortable demotion in the food chain. The human is no longer the undisputed master presence dictating the terms of the environment. When a motion sensor records a pack of 6 wolves lingering around the cold fire pit of an outfitter camp at midnight, the message is undeniable. The hunters are being actively outmaneuvered, psychologically pressured, and completely squeezed out of their own meticulously scouted territories. But this aggressive territorial expansion does not stop at intimidating weekend sportsmen out of the deep woods. The wolves are claiming the most resource-rich zones, zeroing in on the narrow bottlenecks where prey is forced to travel between valleys. These premium ambush locations were never truly empty, even before the infrared cameras started flashing. By annexing these specific geographic pinch points, the pack is moving directly into the living room of a completely different kind of killer. The human retreat leaves a sudden vacuum in the canopy, but the jagged rocks above are already occupied by an entrenched, silent hunter who refuses to be displaced without shedding blood. That entrenched, Silent Hunter is a 160-pound mountain lion, a solitary ambush predator that has owned the vertical terrain of the Rockies for decades. For generations, a mature tom cougar dragging a fresh mule deer into a rocky outcropping faced zero competition. He would cache the meat under a thick layer of pine needles and feed undisturbed for days, completely dominating his drainage. But the rules of the high-altitude hierarchy shatter the moment hot blood hits the dirt inside a wolf pack's territory. The scent of an opened carcass drifts down the canyon on the thermal winds, acting as a potent chemical beacon. The wolves do not simply want to scavenge the meat. They aim to systematically eliminate the formidable rival who dared to secure a kill in their newly claimed bottleneck. When a pack of 6 wolves locates the cache, they do not hesitate or attempt to steal a quick bite in the shadows. They charge the site with calculated violence. A mountain lion is an ambush predator perfectly adapted for a single, explosive strike, possessing heavy claws that hook deep into muscle and a jaw designed to instantly sever a spinal cord. But a cougar is entirely unequipped for a prolonged, brutal fight against 600 pounds of combined canine muscle attacking from every angle. The wolves swarm the deer carcass, snapping their jaws and driving the feline back with coordinated, relentless rushes. They use their numbers to isolate the cat from its heavy timber cover, forcing a desperate, hissing retreat. The lion slashes out, landing a blinding strike that tears open a wolf's shoulder. But the sheer volume of teeth pressing in from the flanks is overwhelming. Wolves rely on endless endurance and a crushing bite force of 400 pounds per square inch to break their targets. The solitary cat is inevitably forced to abandon 100 pounds of vital calories and scramble 40 feet up the nearest ponderosa pine just to survive. The wolves aggressively feed on the stolen deer directly beneath him, cracking the femurs and tearing the hide while the lion watches, trapped and shivering. A cougar cannot stay in a tree forever when the ambient temperature drops to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, but the pack will patiently guard the base of the trunk until the carcass is completely stripped. This brutal eviction is not an isolated skirmish over a single meal. It is a brutal pattern of displacement that occurs wherever established wolf packs push deep into prime cougar habitat. The pack methodically patrols these productive wintering grounds, aggressively driving away any mountain lions they happen to encounter while following the migrating herds. The cougars are being violently pushed higher into the barren, rocky crags where prey is scarce and the snow is far too deep for their stalking style. By hijacking these kills, the wolf pack dictates the ecological balance of power through sheer force. But a growing pack requires massive, consistent amounts of protein to survive a bitter Colorado winter, and stealing cougar kills only provides a temporary calorie spike. As the wild game becomes increasingly paranoid and difficult to corner in the thick timber, the wolves must continuously expand their hunting radius to maintain their core body heat. They begin to turn their aggressive focus away from the steep ridges and look downward, tracing the frozen river valleys toward the flat, exposed grazing lands where the wild wilderness ends and the agricultural infrastructure begins. That descent into the agricultural grid shifts the conflict from a remote wilderness struggle into a direct confrontation at the back door of civilization. When the wild elk scatter into the high timber and the snow deepens, the sprawling cattle ranches of the valley floor become an undeniable magnetic pull. These properties are vast, open, and loaded with thousands of pounds of captive protein. But reaching them requires crossing the man-made barriers that separate the wild from the domestic. The pack waits for the complete cover of darkness before they drop down the final ridge, moving silently through the frosted sagebrush until their paws hit the hard-packed dirt of a county road. They are no longer hunting in a vacuum. They are actively navigating human infrastructure. A 5-strand barbed wire fence is a formidable obstacle for a fleeing deer, but it means absolutely nothing to a wolf. They do not smash through it. They slide fluidly underneath the bottom wire, leaving only a few coarse hairs snagged on the rusted metal to prove they were ever there. Once inside the property line, the behavior shifts from a direct pursuit into a careful scouting phase. The pack moves like a single organism, stepping precisely in each other's tracks to mask their true numbers from anyone reading the sign at dawn. They shadow the tree lines surrounding the main pastures, their eyes reflecting the solitary glow of a ranch house porch light. They are mapping the perimeter, testing the wind for the scent of heavy calves, and calculating the exact distance between the livestock and the sleeping humans. It is a silent intrusion that turns a working cattle operation into a monitored target. The first line of defense is not a locked gate, but 120 pounds of aggressive canine muscle specifically bred to die for the herd. Anatolian shepherds and Great Pyrenees patrol these pastures, animals instinctively driven to detect the slightest shift in the nighttime environment. When the wolf pack breaches the outer perimeter, the guard dogs detonate. Their frantic barking shatters the 2 a.m. silence, echoing across the frozen valley and pulling ranchers out of their beds with rifles in hand. But the wolves do not immediately retreat from the noise. They linger just beyond the reach of the floodlights. They pace along the edge of the shadows, deliberately agitating the domestic dogs to gauge their numbers, their aggression, and how fast the humans respond to the alarm. The wolves do not fear these solitary defenders. They are calculating their next move, watching the dogs throw themselves against the heavy wooden corral posts. This nocturnal probing is a calculated learning process. The pack is discovering exactly how far they can push into the pastures before triggering a lethal response. Morning light reveals the terrifying proximity of the threat. Massive tracks, measuring 5 inches long, are pressed into the fresh snow just 50 yards from the carving sheds, weaving directly between the overlapping prints of the exhausted guard dogs. The ranchers are forced into a state of hyper-vigilance, burning diesel to patrol their fence lines at all hours, while the predators simply vanish back into the tree line to sleep out the daylight. The boundary between the wild and the tame has been completely erased. As the deepest freeze of late December sets in and the ranch defenses tighten, the starving pack is forced to look back up the mountain, right as the final wave of armed humans enters the woods. That forced retreat back into the steep timber puts the hungry pack on a direct collision course with the final influx of blaze orange. The late rifle seasons in Colorado operate under brutal conditions, often defined by blinding snow squalls and temperatures plunging below zero. The outdoorsmen who draw these late tags are tracking the remaining herds through dense whiteouts, relying entirely on reading fresh indentations in the deep powder. But the moment a hunter cuts a fresh trail of a moving bull, a chilling realization often follows just a few hundred yards up the ridge. Massive 5-inch canine tracks suddenly merge out of the brush and drop directly into the exact same hoofprints the human is following. This is the terrifying geometry of a parallel hunt. The man and the pack are locked onto the identical target, moving through the exact same isolated drainage at the exact same time. Visibility drops to 40 yards in the swirling blizzard, rendering expensive optics completely useless. The hunter is gripping a heavy rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, but the sheer density of the lodgepole pines neutralizes that ballistic advantage. He is forced to creep through the deadfall, acutely aware that a highly organized unit of lethal predators is just ahead of him, closing the gap on the exhausted elk. The silence of the snowfall is absolute, masking the sound of both human boots and padded paws. The physical evidence of this shared pursuit becomes impossible to ignore as they push deeper into the Flat Tops wilderness. A hunter following the frozen trench will find spots where the wolves paused to test the wind, leaving distinct depressions in the drifts alongside the elk trail. Yellow urine burns through the pristine snow, claiming the immediate path. The scent of raw pine sap from snapped branches mixes with a musky odor hanging in the freezing air. The human is no longer just stalking an animal for the freezer. He is actively participating in a lethal race against a 600-pound hunting pack that must secure this specific meat to survive the winter. As the blizzard intensifies, the tracks begin to overlap and weave, indicating the pack is accelerating and spreading out for the ambush. The hunter finds drops of bright blood sprayed across the snow, signifying the wolves have made their initial contact with the hindquarters of the bull. The human is stepping directly into the chaotic epicenter of a kill in progress. Every snapped twig sounds like a gunshot, and the shadows shifting between the snow-covered trees start to look like moving predators. The isolation of the backcountry amplifies the threat, turning a traditional harvest into a nerve-wracking, vigilant stalk through the timber. The hunter must constantly check his blind spots, scanning the thick brush to see if the scattered pack has decided to abandon the dying elk and turn their attention toward the lone biped walking directly into their strike zone. The snow will eventually melt across the western slope, washing away the scattered bones and the physical evidence of the winter kills. But the shift in these mountains is permanent. The comforting illusion of absolute human control has been completely shattered. Colorado is no longer a safely managed playground for weekend sportsmen and quiet outfitter camps. It has aggressively reverted into a raw, unforgiving frontier. Every step into that dark timber now means accepting your place in a violently redefined food chain, sharing the air with a predator that respects no property lines and negotiates with no one. The wilderness is continuously rewriting its own rules, and this expanding pack is just one piece of a much larger, continent-wide shift in the natural order. These predators will keep testing the fences, reclaiming the old territories, and challenging the human footprint wherever it weakens. If you want to track where they push next and understand the unvarnished reality of these primal encounters, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your time today. We will keep following the tracks into the deep timber to show you exactly what is waiting in the shadows.